All, welcome to the block 5, which is sustainability and supply chain of economics track. Today we have Henrique Wanabaja with us, and about resilient supply chains, how to benefit from 3D printing. Yes. So, Henrique, you there? Yes. There we have Henrique with
Hi.
us today. Hello, Henrique. How is it going with you?
Good. Everything's fine. How are you?
I am good too. And thank you so much for being a speaker over here at TIPE 2023 for Economics Track. And we welcome you to our track, which is Sustainability and Supply Chain. Here we have approximately 33 attendees with us. A very good afternoon, good evening, good morning to all of you, those who are from different time zones. So we would love to have you all here. Please drop in your question and answers in Q&A tab and feel free to reach out to us in chat section. And with that, I would like to bring on Henrique Wanabaja with us. She is the COO and co-founder of Replique. Um, and she will be talking about resilient supply chains and how to benefit from 3D printing. So the floor is all yours. Henrique, feel free to share your presentation.
Yes. Thank you,
Yes.
Swati. I will try to do that now, and let's hope it works.
Yeah.
And all right. I think that looks promising.
I'm just going to wait for another couple of seconds when I see the screen.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, there you are. Full screen. It's working perfect, Henrique. All right, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Swati, for the short introduction. So my name is Henrike. I am COO and co-founder of Replique. And at Replique, we have an end-to-end platform that we offer to our customers to virtually store their parts, to manage their parts in a digital inventory, but also to later on get those parts printed via a decentralized global network. So basically on demand. It's a great pleasure for me to speak here again at this conference and to speak about this topic of resilient supply chain, because that's really a topic that's close to my heart and also very close to what we do at Replique. So looking forward to presenting here, and especially, of course, to your questions and the discussion later on. So, okay, the clicking doesn't work. Let me just give me 1 second. All right. So here we go. When we look at the global supply chain pressure index, I guess it's not very surprising to see that this has risen, especially over the past months, or the past the latest years. So I guess last year we were all speaking about the disruptions from the Ever Given, and we were speaking about the disruptions coming from the different COVID lockdowns. And this year, we're speaking about the disruptions coming from the war in Ukraine, which has, on the one hand, caused a large energy crisis. On the other hand, it's also cut off supply chain ways and sort of supply chains as such, because obviously it's a very central region in the world, and so that's sort of the supply chain side that again is disrupted. And the question now is, with all of these disruptions being kind of new, but coming again and again, what can companies do, or what do they plan on doing? How do they react? And that companies are reacting, I think you can see very nicely from this survey done by McKinsey. And let's be a little unconventional and start from the right to the left. So what are their measures? One measure for sure is regionalizing the supply chain. So, this topic of reshoring. And to be honest, maybe that's a good idea and certainly something I think where AM can help. The other measure that they're taking, to be seen in the middle, is that they go for dual sourcing, not just a second supplier as such, but that they're thinking about sourcing different materials, maybe different technologies. So, also interesting aspect when you think about additive manufacturing. The third on the very left, however, is that they heavily start increasing their inventory, and that's kind of surprising because I think for years OEMs have tried to optimize their supply chains to decrease stock as much as possible. And now here we have a few disruptions, and now the answer is going back to more inventory. That's something that I would say is not ideal, and maybe with additive manufacturing not necessary, at least not for all parts. So basically, I believe there's a much better solution, which is decentralized 3D printing using an on-demand platform. If we take a look at how supply chains look like, so on the left-hand side, traditional supply chains, then they typically require lots of shipping on very, very complex routes. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, if you look at an additive manufacturing supply chain, you can keep your parts virtual for as long as possible. And then when you're almost there, you get your parts printed and you ship the last mile. And you can do that on demand. So if you, just from the pictures, of course, looking at this, the right-hand side, the AM supply chain, is a much cleaner and leaner option to manage. There's another aspect to traditional supply chains, which is this inventory. And we just heard that companies are considering or are already increasing inventory quite a bit. But if we look at it, then all of this inventory or most of this inventory doesn't even create much value, but it's basically it's clogging the warehouses and it's costing a lot of money. So also here, if you go for AM, you could reduce that. And that's basically a chart of how you could do that. Benefit from AM, because if you use additive manufacturing, it's a global movement. I mean, we're here speaking, I'm speaking in a global conference with people from all over the world, sort of into the topic of AM. It's a very universal field when it comes to technologies and materials, and there's capacities worldwide. So in this chart, it's basically how we deal with this at Replique, that there's a digital warehouse, and there's a whole network in the back of it for production. Of course, you can also think about building something like this yourself, which is doable, but it's quite complex. So, but it's good. I mean, as an OEM, you can choose from either building up your own supplier network, or you can go through a platform and access via this platform know-how and capacities. But of course, to do this, I think we need to look at also what can be printed. So we know not everything can be printed, and also when parts can be printed, the question is always, is there a business case behind? So this is sort of 3 typical cases that we've identified. The first 2 of them are really typical spare parts. So you have a machine running and downtime will cost you a lot of money. You would typically go for spare part, either a spare part like a provisionary solution. So you 3D print, you use it until you have the original spare part, which might be a little better in spec or more long lasting. But you have managed to keep your machines running, and that's the most important thing. On the other hand, it doesn't need to be that the 3D printed part is worse or in any kind or has like less performance, and that would be the second. So you have really an equivalent in additive manufacturing. And the third part, I think, is also a very interesting part. It's typical small series that you have either in ramp up or you have in phase out, or you have as such, because maybe it's for a product where you don't have that many, that high volumes being produced. So these are typical use cases, and now that's very theoretical. So I thought I'd bring you some of the use cases from our work. And here what you see in the pictures for example, for quick spare part delivery on the left-hand side, it's a broken cover for a tractive unit, and on the bottom you see the 3D printed spare part nicely fitted, and the tractor is good to go again. On the right-hand side, it's another example is from sort of the transportation industry. It's a tank cap from our customer Alstom of a diesel hauling engine. And then we also brought some ideas or some use cases from small and medium series. So also from the trains, the door stopper, that's the top picture on the left-hand side. So it's a metal part. On the bottom, it's it's a bunch of connectors being printed, and on the right-hand side, it's a sensor housing for one of our customers. And then on the right-hand side, last but not least, this ramp up and bridging or small series production. The example of Miele accessories on the bottom, and on the top, also for the phase out. It's spare parts that otherwise wouldn't be offered by the OEM, but they're now being offered 3D printed so that people are able to prolong product lifetimes and therefore repair and be more sustainable. So whilst all of these are very nice examples, and I guess most of you would be able to print these parts right away, for a really resilient supply chain, it's not enough to just print parts, because then what do? You have a bunch of connectors, a box of them maybe. How do you now manage them in your supply chain? So basically, what it needs is a smooth integration into your supply chain processes. And I mean, there's many more aspects than those four main aspects that I've put down here, but I just want to go through those four because we believe these are really core to manage when you want to use additive in your supply chain. One is a secure digital inventory where you have all your printable parts and data. The second is that you need somehow integration of that digital inventory, because otherwise it's going to be a manual process. Three is for each part, you need to know how to produce it and with whom to produce it. And then four, last but not least, it's very important that for industrial printing, you have quality assurance. And maybe to take a look at those steps in more depth and also give you an idea of how we now solve this at Replique is we have a digital warehouse for our customers. So each customer obviously has their own proprietary digital warehouse. And this is where really they can store all the data around their parts. So it could be a CAD file, but there's also print files in there. And there's other data coming, for example, from the quality assurance. Everything regarding this one individual part is in the digital warehouse. Now, as I said, a warehouse is only good for a supply chain if it's integrated. So basically, this digital warehouse needs to be integratable with standard systems, like an e-commerce system depicted here with the Miele online shop, but also, of course, ERP systems. Because this way, the customer or the OEM can just use standard systems to push the data. They won't even know there's this whole complex AM supply chain in the background. They push the data in, the orders, for example, and they receive data about the production later on. The third point is this part by part. I mean, we all know that 3D printing is not one technology. It's various technologies. It's very fragmented. We have a vast choice of materials. And if we think about this topic of reshoring that many OEMs want to do now, it's also a question about locations. Or maybe you remember this slide with the map that I showed before. So really, you need to go part by part and decide where should it be produced and how should it be produced. So this is also something that that needs to be somehow smoothly integrated into the processes, because you don't want to go with one file to one supplier and then go back to a different geography to the next supplier. And then this topic of quality assurance, I think that's something when we speak about industrial 3D printing, so not serial printing, not just prototyping, it's really important that that there's a possibility to have your own defined quality as an OEM, and at the same time that once you've defined this quality, that wherever you print this part, it's always according to the same quality. So this is something that is important, and later on, of course, that it's documented, because as an OEM, you always want transparency and also documentation in case later on you need to check something. Why did something break down? You go into that data, you find it right away. And so that's something that also is to have in your resilient AM supply chain. But to sum it up, if you do all this, I believe that a resilient supply chain building on 3D printing and integrated into standard processes and systems is a great chance to face these supply chain disruptions that we've had, because you do reshoring by not adding complexity. You do sort of satisfy this alternative sourcing, and not only by one different material, but also by a different technology, by completely different supply chain, which I think is interesting and makes it more resilient. And the last point, I think, is the most important point. You do this by not only not increasing your inventory levels, but by even decreasing them. And so I think that's really a win-win-win. And yeah, with that, I want to close, and I'm looking forward to your questions and the discussion. Thank you very much.
Audible, right? Enrique, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so you can stop sharing the presentation now so that we can take up a couple of questions which we have. Thank you so much for sharing a lot of insights from the supply chain industry. I mean, the first question which comes to my mind is what were you thinking when you named your company Replique? I mean, I would love to know the backstory of it.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I guess for most of you, Replique, you hear this association with replica and replicating something. So this was basically the idea, to replicate in a way that it means same quality and really replicating. So this idea of being able to print parts all over the world, the same quality on demand. This was really the idea for our name, Replique.
And the another follow-up question is, when you guys started off, because it needs a certain ecosystem in your own country, so did you first made sure that you have an ecosystem, and then you go ahead and start off this printing process? So you had that kind of challenges when you were starting off when it came to ecosystem?
Well, I mean, Replique was born out of BSF. So this is maybe I
Mhm.
didn't mention this in the beginning, but that's our background. That's where I come from. And my co-founder, we've worked there for a long time. And BSF is probably known to most of you as a large chemical company, so famous also for raw materials. But BSF also has a subsidiary um, that is commercializing or developing, commercializing 3D printing materials with the brand of Forward AM. So in a way, we were already kind of born into a 3D printing ecosystem, a very small one, of course. And from there, we started expanding. So Replique, we come from BSF, but we're independent. So we started building up various material partnerships. Besides BSF materials, we work very closely with Evonik, for example, or with Arkema. So Lehmann Foss. There's many players that
Definitely.
you can see on our
Yeah,
website. But so this is something where we started growing our own ecosystem. And I think that's also very important about Replique, that we understand ourselves not just like as a digital inventory, but really as an AM ecosystem with this holistic view, end to end, thinking starting from the material, but really ending only not even after printing, but also shipping and this quality assurance. Yeah.
that's a, I mean, huge pool of people. So overall, if I may ask that, how many ecosystem partners do you have on board on an average?
I mean, I think I shared on one slide that we have a little over 75 print partners, but we have, of course, additional partners, and it's a growing network. But at the same time, I want to emphasize that for us, it's not about quantity so much, but it's more
Mhm.
about quality, because what we are trying to achieve, or what we're doing, is it's industrial 3D printing. So here it's really important, for example, that our partners have certain certifications. So
Mhm.
yeah, quantity is not everything. Of course, when you want to go global, it matters,
Yes.
but it's not everything. Yeah.
Yes. So we do have another question from Amy Sin, and he's asking that, may I ask what is the biggest challenge big company face when they have to adapt to a digital warehouse idea? I mean, what's the main challenge?
I mean, I think for many, I mean, it's a disruption in itself, because it's very different. Usually you have parts, you can count them in your inventory. Now you go for digital inventory, and you need this kind of activation energy to really think through the process for your company. And how do you do this? For example, the onboarding of the parts. I mean, you have to think about onboarding each part, and sort of qualifying each part now for additive. If you're speaking about legacy parts, this is getting easier as we go along, because for new parts, maybe you start thinking about additive right away. But I think this is something in our current times which is demanding for OEMs to take this extra step. So, like, yeah, activation energy. On the other hand, to also trust this new supply chains of additive, I think is something, um, because I mean, with all innovations or with all new things, that's something you need to build a track record.
Mhm.
I think these are two challenges. I think also the question of, do I build it all myself, or do I go and outsource things? And what do I outsource is also something that every OEM needs to answer for themselves.
Yeah, that's so true. We have another question, like when your company was founded and how many employees do you have currently?
Okay. Yeah, so as I
Please do
said, the
answer that.
inception was sort of in BSF.
Yes.
So, and today we are still owned by BSF. So the inception date was more 2020. So we've been there for a few years now, 3 years, and
Mhm.
we are a team of 12. So that's the core team. Not forgetting that, of course, we have kind of a network around us. And our
Mhm.
next step, and we're in fully in the middle of this is a spin-out from or spin-off from BASF at the moment.
Yeah, I could see we have another 2 minutes with us. So I'll quickly jump into our last question. How do you see the need of demand forecasting in AM supply chain?
Forecasting in AM
Yes,
supply chain. Yeah, very,
yes.
very specific
That's a
topic.
very intelligent question, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I guess it's a very good question because, of course, you can use AM to, go for your final product directly, but you can also go use AM for molds and, make other or facilitate other technologies to go for smaller lot sizes. So I would say there is the demand for sure, and I see that it's developing like its own brand, so to say, in tooling and yes, for sure.
Yeah. And one personal question which I have is, suppose certain designs which are kind of, I mean, have IPs, how do you make sure to, have the confidentiality intact, and then sharing the whole, or maybe delivering the product at the same time? How do you manage the IP at your own level?
Yes. So Replique is a secure platform in the way that we have encryption in place. And with
Mhm.
that encryption, we can also manage that, for example, if a part is only demanded 5 times, it can only be printed 5 times. That's one thing, but also with that encryption, I also want to emphasize that we can enforce the quality because with that we can also, I mean, it's also important for the OEM that once a part is qualified to be printed in a certain material and in a certain way, in a certain technology with certain parameters, that these parameters are not changed by anyone, so not changed by the supplier. So that's also possible to ensure with encryption.
That's amazing to hear that you do have an encryption in place, so that if somebody orders in one piece and then you can only print one piece. I mean, that's the technology is kind of incredible in those aspects, I would say. So thank you so much, Henrique, for your lovely time